It hurts, don't do that, the giant Apache girl pleads with lonely rancher. Elijah had always felt a deep connection with the land. The ranch was his life. Its long days and hard work were all he had. His father had passed away years ago, and with his brothers moving away to start their own families, the ranch had become his responsibility. It was a vast plot of land stretching as far as the eye could see, with grazing cattle, fields of tall grass, and the distant mountain range standing like silent sentinels. Every morning Elijah woke up before the sun even thought about rising. He would make a pot of coffee and head out to the barn, the cool desert air biting at his skin. His work was never-ending, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, and making sure the well had enough water. The ranch was remote, far from the nearest town, and Elijah liked it that way. It gave him peace, a kind of quiet solitude that allowed him to focus. But over the years, the solitude had started to weigh on him. Elijah found himself speaking less and less to the cattle, as though he was slowly losing his voice. The quiet was both a comfort and a burden. He had grown so used to the sound of his own footsteps echoing across the land that he didn't realize how deeply the loneliness had seeped into his bones. Some evenings, when the wind was still and the sky turned to shades of pink and gold, Elijah would sit on the porch of the small house he had built with his father. He would watch the horizon, wondering what life might be like beyond the ranch. He missed the company of others, even though he would never admit it to anyone. The thought of starting a family, of having someone to share the work with, seemed like a dream that had long since slipped away. It was just him. And that was how it had to be. One particular evening, as the sun began to set, something unusual happened. Elijah was walking along the far side of the ranch, checking the fence line that ran along the edge of the desert. He had heard rumors of strange sightings in the area, tales of people disappearing, of animals being spooked, but he had always dismissed them as nothing more than wild stories told by passing travelers. But that evening something felt different. As he rounded a bend near the edge of the property, he saw a figure in the distance. At first he thought it was just a mirage, the heat of the desert playing tricks on his eyes. But as he got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a woman, standing tall and still as a statue. Her back was turned, and she seemed unaware of Elijah's presence. He froze, unsure of what to do. This was the last thing he had expected to find in the middle of nowhere. The woman was dressed in simple clothes, her hair long and wild, blowing slightly in the wind. Her stance was strong, and despite the distance, Elijah could tell that she was not someone to be taken lightly. She seemed out of place, like a shadow from another time. "Desk." "Hey there!" Elijah called out, his voice hesitant at first. The woman turned slowly, and Elijah took a step back, instinctively. Her eyes were wide and dark, full of something he couldn't quite place. Fear, pain, or perhaps a combination of both.
"She didn't speak at first."
Instead, she studied him carefully, as though trying to decide whether he was a threat or not. "I'm sorry to bother you," Elijah said, his voice growing steadier. "Are you lost?" The woman didn't respond, and for a moment Elijah wondered if she could even hear him. Her gaze drifted past him, scanning the horizon as though she was waiting for something, someone, perhaps. But when her eyes returned to him, she gave a small nod. It was enough for Elijah to understand that she was in need of help. "Do you need some water or something to eat?" he asked, taking a cautious step forward. He wasn't sure what to do in this situation. He had no idea who this woman was, or why she was out here in the desert alone. It wasn't safe for anyone to be out here without supplies. The woman's gaze softened, but she still didn't speak. She looked down at the ground, as if ashamed, and then looked back at Elijah, her voice quiet and strained. I am lost, she finally said. My name is Tala. Elijah's heart sank as he took in her words. She sounded exhausted, like she had been walking for days without rest.
And yet there was something about her that didn't match the desperation he expected from someone stranded in the desert.
She held herself with a quiet strength, as though she had endured much more than just the harsh landscape around them. You must be thirsty, Elijah said, trying to offer some comfort. Come with me. I have water back at my place. You can rest there. Tala hesitated, glancing at the desert around her as though weighing her options. Elijah understood her wariness. She was alone in a strange place with no reason to trust him. But he couldn't leave her out here. Not like this. I don't have much to offer, Elijah said gently, but I can help. Finally, Tala nodded, and they began the walk back toward the ranch. Elijah could feel the weight of the silence between them, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement that they were both struggling in their own ways. Elijah, with his loneliness and the endless days of hard work, and Tala, with whatever had brought her to this desolate place.
When they arrived at the small house, Elijah led her inside.
He quickly made her a cup of tea and offered her some bread. She accepted silently, her hands trembling as she took the food. Elijah watched her, concerned. She looked fragile, like she might break at any moment. Over the next few hours, they sat in silence, with only the soft crackling of the fire breaking the quiet. Elijah didn't press her to speak. He knew that some people needed time, and he wasn't the type to force conversation. But after a while, Tala looked up from her tea, her eyes filled with both gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. You're welcome here as long as you need. I don't have much, but I can share what I have. As the evening drew on, Elijah noticed the way Tala seemed to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. But he also sensed that there was something she wasn't telling him, something that had brought her to this place, far away from her people. But for now, Elijah didn't ask. He didn't need to know. He had his ranch, and for the first time in a long time he had someone to share it with, even if only for a while. As the night grew darker and the stars appeared, Elijah sat in his favorite chair looking out at the vast desert stretching into the distance. It felt strange to have someone else there with him. But in some way, it felt right. Breaths. Maybe this was what he had been missing all these years. A connection, a sense of purpose beyond the ranch. The next few days passed in a strange but comforting quiet. Elijah's ranch, usually a place of solitude, now had a sense of life. He had grown used to the rhythm of his work, the long days, the quiet evenings. But with Tala's presence, everything seemed to slow down in a way he wasn't used to. Breath. He didn't mind it, though. There was something peaceful about the way she moved through the house, like a calm presence in the midst of a whirlwind. At first, Tala didn't speak much. She would sit at the table, sipping her tea or staring out the window, as though lost in thought. Elijah didn't press her to talk. He knew that sometimes people just needed time to heal, to gather their strength. But he couldn't help but wonder about her past, the things that had led her to this point. On the third day after their meeting, Elijah was out in the fields mending a fence that had been damaged by the last storm. The wind was light, the sky cloudless, and the cattle grazed lazily in the distance. He was focused on his work, his hands moving with practiced ease, when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Tala standing at the edge of the field watching him. You don't have to do that, Elijah said, wiping his hands on his pants as he walked over to her. It's a lot of work. Tala smiled faintly, but didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the open land, the wide stretch of desert and the mountains in the distance. For a moment, she seemed to be lost in the view, like it was all too much for her to take in at once. "I want to help," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I'm not used to sitting around." "I can't stay idle for long." Elijah nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had spent most of his life working, filling his days with chores and tasks, trying to keep his mind occupied. The silence could be suffocating, and he knew that sometimes people needed to stay busy, needed to feel useful. "All right," he said. "You can help with the cattle. Just follow me, and I'll show you how to keep an eye on them." "We'll take it slow." Tala's face lit up, and she followed him without hesitation. Elijah led her to the pasture, where the cattle were scattered across the grass. He showed her how to check on their condition, how to move them from one part of the field to another. It wasn't difficult work, but it required patience, a skill Tala seemed to possess in abundance. As the day passed, they worked side by side, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. But Tala was a quick learner, picking up on the little things Elijah showed her with ease. It wasn't long before Elijah found himself talking more than he had in years. He spoke about the ranch, about his father and the years he had spent maintaining the land, keeping it alive. Tala listened attentively, her gaze soft and understanding. "You're not from around here, are you?" Elijah asked, after a while, wiping the sweat from his brow. She hadn't expected him to ask about her life. She had been so used to keeping her past hidden, to carrying it with her like a burden she couldn't let go of. But there was something about Elijah's presence, his kindness, that made her want to share. "No," she said quietly.
"I come from a tribe far from here. My people—"
"They live in the mountains, near the river." Elijah didn't speak right away. He could tell that there was more to the story, more that Tala wasn't saying. He respected her silence, but he couldn't help but feel a curiosity stir within him. Why had she run away? B.S. What had happened to her that made her leave her people behind? Tala turned away, her gaze drifting to the horizon. I wasn't safe there anymore," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a fight, perhaps, a conflict, and I couldn't stay. I had to leave." Elijah didn't press her further, but he could see that this was a painful topic, one that she wasn't ready to share completely. Instead, he offered her a simple smile, a silent gesture that he understood, that he didn't need to know all the details. Tala seemed to relax, just a little, at his response. She hadn't expected him to be so accepting, so patient. But there was a calm in Elijah's presence that made her feel like maybe she didn't have to carry her past all by herself anymore. For the next few days, Tala worked alongside Elijah, and they fell into a rhythm together. The work wasn't always easy, but it was satisfying. Elijah noticed how strong Tala was, how she moved with a grace that belied her size. She was capable, more capable than many people he had known in his life. She took to ranching like it was in her blood, and soon she was helping with everything from mending fences to caring for the animals. But Elijah also noticed something else. As the days passed, Tala seemed to be growing more distant. It wasn't that she was pulling away from him, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. At night, when they sat around the fire, she would stare into the flames, lost in thought. And Elijah could see the weight of her memories pressing down on her. One evening, after they had finished their work for the day, Tala sat down on the porch, her legs stretched out in front of her. Elijah joined her, sitting silently at first. He had learned that sometimes people needed quiet moments, just to think and breathe. "Do you ever think about the past?" Tala asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Elijah glanced at her, unsure of how to answer. He thought about his own life, about the years spent working alone on the ranch, about his father's death and his brothers moving away. He thought about how much he had given to the land and how little he had in return. He had his work, his home, but there had been times when he wondered if he had let his life slip by without really living.
I think about it sometimes, Elijah said slowly.
But I've learned to keep moving forward. The past, it's a part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. Tala nodded, though her eyes seemed distant, like she wasn't sure if she agreed. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. I don't know if I can move forward, she said softly. My past. It's always with me. Breaths. Elijah didn't know what to say to that. He couldn't pretend to understand what she had gone through, what she had left behind. But he knew that there was something special about Tala, something that told him she could find her way, even if it took time. You don't have to be alone anymore, Elijah said after a long pause. You're welcome here as long as you need. You're not a burden. Tala met his gaze, and for the first time in days there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope, perhaps. She didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could leave her past behind. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was running, and that, in itself, was a small but significant step forward. As the weeks passed, Elijah and Tala fell into a steady routine. The days were long, filled with work, but there was a certain comfort in the predictability. Elijah appreciated the help, and Tala seemed to find a sense of purpose in the work. The ranch was starting to feel less like just Elijah's place and more like something they were both building together. Tala had grown stronger, her injuries healing as time passed. She was no longer the quiet, fragile girl who had first arrived at the ranch. She had a quiet strength about her, and Elijah could see it in the way she moved, her confidence growing with each passing day. There were mornings when she would wake up before the sun, heading out to the fields to check on the cattle, her face set in determination. Elijah couldn't help but admire her resilience, but there were still moments when Tala would retreat into herself, her thoughts clearly far away. Elijah noticed the way her eyes would cloud over when she thought no one was looking, as though the weight of the past was something she could never fully escape. He didn't press her to talk about it, but every now and then he would catch her staring at the mountains in the distance, her gaze far away and thoughtful. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, as they often did. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the wind was cool against their skin. Elijah had been mending a broken fence earlier, his hands sore from the work, but now he was content to relax, his feet resting on the edge of the porch. Tala sat next to him, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was quieter than usual, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Elijah didn't say anything right away, sensing that she was lost in thought. He had learned over the past few weeks that sometimes silence was the best way to give someone space, especially when they were struggling with something they didn't want to share. You're a hard worker, Elijah said after a long pause. You've got the land running like it's always been yours. I like the work, she said simply. It gives me something to focus on. Elijah nodded, understanding. He, too, had found solace in the work of the ranch. It was simple, grounding, and kept his mind from wandering too far. But sometimes even the hard work couldn't keep the loneliness away. I think you found your place here, Elijah added, his voice thoughtful. Breath. Tala looked at him then, and for the first time in a while there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. I don't know, she said softly. Sometimes I wonder if I can ever truly belong anywhere.
Elijah's heart sank at her words. He hadn't meant to bring up something that was clearly so painful for her.
He shifted slightly, turning his body toward her. You belong here. You've helped me more than you know. This ranch. It's better with you here. Tala shook her head slightly, looking down at her hands.
It's not just about the ranch, she murmured. I can't escape what I've done, the things I've left behind.
I don't know if I'll ever find a place where I feel at peace.
Elijah didn't know how to respond at first.
He wasn't good with words, especially when it came to things that were so deep and personal. But he could see the pain in her eyes, the way her past was constantly weighing on her, no matter how hard she tried to move forward. I don't know what you've been through, Elijah said quietly, but I know this much. No one can outrun their past forever, but that doesn't mean it defines you. You can start again. We all can. Paula didn't say anything for a long moment. She seemed to be thinking deeply about his words, considering them in a way that made Elijah wonder if she had ever truly allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. I've tried, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. But the fear never goes away. It's always there, hiding just beneath the surface. What if my people come looking for me? Pat, what if they want me back? I've abandoned them. I left my family behind. Elijah could hear the pain in her voice, the guilt that had followed her all this way. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that it wasn't too late, but he knew that kind of pain wasn't something he could heal with words alone. Still, he felt the need to say something, anything, to help her feel less alone. You don't owe them anything, Elijah said firmly, his voice strong. You don't have to go back to a life that hurt you. If you want to stay here, I'll help you. You can make your own choices. You're free to be who you are now. Tala turned her gaze toward him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and hope. It was the first time since their conversation began that she truly seemed to believe his words. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, the weight of her thoughts settling between them. The days that followed were not without their struggles. Tala's past continued to haunt her, and there were moments when Elijah could see the shadows in her eyes. But slowly, bit by bit, she began to open up more. She shared more about her tribe, about the life she had left behind. She told Elijah about her family, her childhood, and the way her tribe had always been there for her. But there was always a sense of sadness in her voice when she spoke of them. It was clear that leaving had been a choice made out of necessity, not desire. Elijah listened, offering what comfort he could, but never pushing her to share more than she was ready to. He learned about the complexities of her life, about the deep ties she had with her people and the fear that had driven her to flee. He realized that Tala's strength wasn't just in the way she carried herself, but in the way she faced her past every day, even when it felt like it might consume her. One evening, as they finished a long day's work, Elijah noticed Tala staring at the distant mountains again. This time, her expression was different. There was no longer a look of longing or sadness, but rather a sense of determination. She was no longer running from her past. She had come to accept that it would always be a part of her, but it didn't have to control her.
I'm not running anymore, Tala said softly, as though speaking to herself more than to Elijah.
I'm here now, and I'm going to make it work. Elijah smiled, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. I'm glad you're here. Tala turned to look at him then, and for the first time since they had met, there was a spark of something in her eyes, something brighter, something hopeful. The weight of her past still lingered, but it no longer held her captive. For the first time in a long time, Tala believed that she could truly build a future. One morning, as the sun rose high above the desert, casting long shadows across the ranch, a change was in the air. It had been weeks since Tala had arrived, and though life on the ranch had settled into a comforting routine, a storm was quietly brewing on the horizon. Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Breaths. He had gotten used to Tala's presence, to the way she helped him with the work, and the way she'd slowly opened up to him over time. There was a warmth between them now, a growing bond. But every now and then, when he would look over at her, he could see that old shadow behind her eyes, the fear of her past. The uncertainty of what might come next.
Elijah had seen it before!
In his years of working alone, he had met plenty of people who had wandered into his life, looking for a place to escape from their troubles. Some stayed, some left, but none had ever truly been able to leave their pasts behind. Elijah had always believed that a person could find peace, but sometimes that peace wasn't as easy to reach as it seemed. It was a cool morning when the change finally came. Elijah was in the barn, checking on the horses, when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. At first, he thought it was one of the nearby ranchers coming to visit, but when he stepped outside and saw the figures riding toward him, his heart skipped a beat. It was a group of Apache warriors. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the leader, the tall man who had once visited him years ago, warning him about the dangers of the desert. But now, with a group of warriors behind him, it was clear that this visit was no ordinary one. Tala appeared beside Elijah, her face pale. She had seen them too, and her eyes went wide with fear.
"They've come for me,"
she said, her voice trembling. Elijah turned to her, his heart pounding. He could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had haunted her since the moment they first met.
He wanted to say something comforting, but words didn't come easily in a moment like this. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer her some small reassurance.
"You don't have to go back," Elijah said softly, though he wasn't sure how to protect her. The Apache were known for their fierce loyalty, and Tala's defiance had likely angered her people.
It was unclear how they would react when they learned she had chosen to stay. As the warriors drew closer, Elijah could see that the leader was not smiling. His face was hard, his expression unreadable. He didn't look like a man there to offer peace. "Tala!" the leader called out, his voice carrying across the wind. "You've returned to this place, but your place is not here. You belong with your people." Tala flinched at the sound of his voice. She knew this man. He was a member of her tribe, someone she had once respected. But now his words seemed like a command, and it was clear that he would not let her go without a fight.
"I can't go back," Tala said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I've already made my choice." The leader's gaze flickered to Elijah, and for a moment the air between them seemed thick with tension. Elijah knew that the choice would soon be made. Would the Apache warriors force Tala to return with them, or would they respect her decision and leave her in peace? The leader dismounted from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He took a step toward Tala, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think you can escape us?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Your tribe will never let you live in peace. You've dishonored your people." Tala's shoulders slump, but she didn't back away fast. Instead, she stood tall, meeting the leader's gaze with defiance. Elijah had never seen her like this before, unafraid, ready to face whatever consequences came her way.
I didn't dishonor anyone,
she said firmly. "I chose to live my life in peace, not in fear. I made my choice, and I'm not going back." The warriors around the leader exchanged glances, their eyes filled with uncertainty.
They had clearly expected her to return quietly without resistance. But Tala wasn't going to make it easy for them.
Elijah stepped forward, standing beside Tala, his posture protective but calm. "She's right," he said, his voice steady. "Rest. She's made her choice, and it's her right to do so." The leader paused, his eyes narrowing as he looked between Elijah and Tala. For a long moment, there was silence. The warriors didn't move, and the tension between them all hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice low and harsh. "You have broken your bond with your people, Tala, but we will give you one final chance to return. If you refuse, there will be consequences."
Elijah could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what the leader meant by consequences, but he had a bad feeling about it.
He glanced at Tala, who looked as though she was preparing for a fight. Her face was set in determination, her eyes locked on the leader. "She wasn't backing down. I will not go back," Tala said again, her voice strong. "Rest." The leader nodded as though he had expected this answer. He turned to his warriors, giving a signal. Without another word, the group of Apache warriors began to turn their horses around, heading back the way they had come. The leader cast one last lingering glance at Tala and Elijah before following his men. As they rode off, Tala let out a long breath, her body finally relaxing. The weight of the moment was gone, but Elijah could tell it wasn't over. Tala had made her stand, but the future was uncertain. Apache were proud people, and they wouldn't forget this. Tala turned to Elijah, her eyes filled with both relief and sadness. "I don't know what comes next," she said softly, "but I know I can't go back." "Not like this!" Elijah nodded, his heart heavy with the understanding that the road ahead wouldn't be easy for either of them. But he also knew that Tala had made her choice, and that was something worth fighting for.
"You don't have to do it alone," Elijah said, his voice full of conviction.
"I'm here. We'll face whatever comes together." Tala looked at him, a small but genuine smile crossing her face. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time in a long while, Elijah felt that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone either. The next days were filled with uncertainty. Elijah and Tala didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. They would no longer hide from the past but embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. The Apache warriors had left, but Elijah knew they might return and they would need to be ready. Tala stood beside him, not just as a helper or a guest, but as a partner. They had both chosen to build something new together, a life free from the past, and that, in itself, was the first step toward a new beginning. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new kind of rhythm. The tension that had followed Tala and Elijah since the arrival of the Apache warriors slowly faded, but neither of them could shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. Elijah worked the land, doing what he had always done, but now with Tala beside him, everything felt different.
The quiet nights, once filled with his lonely thoughts, now held the sound of conversation and laughter.
There was an undeniable sense of peace between them, but the uncertainty of the future still loomed in the distance. Elijah and Tala continued to work side by side. They fixed fences, cared for the animals, and kept the ranch running smoothly. But they also spent more time together. Tala had begun to open up more about her life, sharing stories from her past. She spoke of her childhood, her family, and the customs of her people. Elijah listened intently, fascinated by her stories. He was learning more about her than he had ever expected, and with each story he saw just how strong she had been, even before she had arrived at his ranch. Yet even as they worked, the unease in the air never fully disappeared. The Apache warrior's visit had left a mark on both of them. Tala had stood her ground, but the leader's warning hung over her like a cloud. Elijah knew that if they came back, it wouldn't be for a friendly visit.
It was only a matter of time before they returned, and he wasn't sure how they would react when they did.
One afternoon, as Elijah was in the barn tending to the horses, Tala came rushing in, her face pale. Elijah dropped the brush he was holding and rushed over to her. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Tala took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "I saw them, the Apache."
"They're back!" Elijah's heart sank, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze.
His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. He hadn't been expecting them to return so soon. It was clear now that the peace they had been living under had been fragile, held together by a thin thread. "Are they coming here?" Elijah asked, already preparing himself for the worst. Tala nodded, her eyes wide with panic.
"Yes, I saw them riding toward the ranch."
"They'll be here soon."
Elijah didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rifle that hung by the door and handed it to Tala.
"Take this," Baragat said. "If they come for you, we'll be ready." "I don't want to fight them, Elijah."
"I can't. I didn't run away to start another war." "I know," Elijah said gently. "But we can't let them take you back."
"Brick, you've made your choice, and you have the right to live your life the way you want." Tala didn't say anything, but the fear in her eyes hadn't faded. Elijah could see that she was struggling with the same dilemma she had faced all along. Her past, her people, and her future. For she wasn't a warrior. She didn't want to fight, but she knew that if they came for her, there would be no choice but to stand her ground. They both stood there for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Elijah could feel the tension building, but he didn't want to show Tala how much he feared the situation. He wanted to be strong for her, to give her the reassurance she needed. "They'll be here soon," Elijah said softly. "Let's head to the barn and prepare." "If they try to take you, we won't let them." Tala nodded, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. They quickly made their way to the barn, where they could hide and prepare if necessary. Elijah checked the windows, making sure they had a clear view of the approaching riders. He knew that there was little chance they would be able to escape if things turned violent, but he was ready to do whatever it took to protect Tala. Casting a fiery glow across the horizon, Elijah heard the sound of hooves growing closer. He could feel his pulse quicken, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Tala stood beside him, her hand clutching the rifle, though she still looked uncertain.
"They're here," Elijah whispered, his voice tight.
He watched the riders, their figures growing larger as they approached. There were fewer of them this time, but Elijah could see the determination in their eyes. They weren't here for a peaceful talk. The leader, the same man who had come to the ranch before, rode at the front of the group. His face was hard, his eyes cold as he looked at Elijah and Tala from a distance. Elijah could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Rasp, he could tell that the leader wasn't here to negotiate. He had come to take Tala back, to force her to return to a life she no longer wanted. Elijah stepped forward, his hand resting on the rifle by his side. Tala stood beside him, her face set in determination. This time she wasn't afraid. She had made her decision and she wasn't going back. "You don't have to do this," Elijah called out, his voice steady. "Tala has made her choice." "She doesn't belong with you anymore. She's here now and she's free to live her life the way she wants." The leader's gaze flickered between Elijah and Tala, his lips curling into a grim smile.
"You think you can change her fate," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can protect her from her people? She belongs with us, not with you."
Bray, Tala stepped forward, her face hardening.
I belong where I choose, she said firmly.
And I've chosen to stay here with Elijah. I will not go back. The leader didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to his warriors, nodding once. Elijah could see the tension in their eyes, the uncertainty. They weren't sure what to do now that Tala had made her choice so publicly, but the leader was unmoving.
You've made a mistake, the leader said at last.
You can't escape your past forever. We'll give you one last chance, Tala.
Come with us now and you won't have to face the consequences. Tala shook her head, her eyes filled with a quiet defiance. No, I've already faced my consequences. I've made my choice. The leader's expression darkened, but he didn't make a move toward her. Instead, he gave a short nod to his men. The warriors looked between Tala and Elijah, their expressions conflicted, before they slowly turned their horses around and began to leave. As the Apache riders disappeared into the distance, Elijah and Tala stood together watching them go. The air was still, the tension slowly easing. The danger had passed, for now, but Elijah knew that this wasn't the end. The Apache might return again, and the future remained uncertain. But for the first time, Tala was no longer afraid.
You did it, Elijah said softly, his voice full of admiration.
But you stood your ground. Tala smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes.
I couldn't keep running from my past. It's a part of me, but it doesn't have to control me anymore. Elijah nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest.
And now you're free.
For the first time in a long while, Tala seemed to believe it. The past no longer held her captive, and she was ready to face whatever came next, whatever challenges the future might bring.
And as long as they were together, Elijah knew they could face anything. Together they turned toward the house, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough.